You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network. For more quality options programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app, available in iTunes and on Google Play. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.
Thanks, Michael. Next up, one of my favorite speakers is a CNBC personality and a good friend. He moved out to San Diego recently, and Jeff and I talk all the time about Amazon. He understands retail better than anybody, and we see some things that other people don't, and Jeff's going to walk you through some of the things he sees. And his voice is awesome.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Let's see. We got his mic up?
I need this thing.
You're good on time.
We're good on time?
All right, rank
Can
it.
we embiggen that?
Can we make it bigger, Joe?
While they're making it bigger, I will point out that I'm the first white man to ever shave his head. It was 1993. I remember distinctly the day doing it. I went to the hairstylist and they said, we're going to make it poofy to disguise where it's thinning in the back. And I had my buddy shave it that next day. It was 1993. So I kind of view all the bald white guys that you see roaming around as my spiritual children. Anyway, we're going to move on. A year ago in this very conference, the question came up, what's going to be the first trillion-dollar company? And we went around the room, and Apple was tossed out, Facebook was tossed out, and I'm not sure, I think it was Howard, but I'd like to take credit for it. Finally, Amazon was mentioned, and no one really gave it that much respect. It's easy to think now that Amazon was this inevitability because they go through cycles like this, but the company has grown in ways that no one expected, and it's only the beginning. Brick and mortar right now is about $3.26 billion when you strip everything away out of the consumer. And so I don't want to talk about automotive, I don't want to talk about gas or food, just stuff that people typically buy online. 10% e-commerce, so they're taking share. If you take these growth rates, and e-commerce has grown at 15% annualized for the last decade, which is astonishing. They're taking enormous share, particularly in the context of a US consumer market that grows at 2 or 3%. It's not unprecedented historically, but what it is a representation of a generational shift, the kind that you see in retail. I grew up in retail. We'll talk about the specifics later. It's a horrible skill set to have. It's a terrible thing to have mastered because you only get a few good trades every generation, and it has to do with the demographics, which we'll get into. But right now, e-commerce is presenting the best opportunity you're going to see in any market because it's $1 trillion. It's a jump ball for $1 trillion in revenues at least, with conservative assumptions just in terms of what e-commerce is going to take from brick and mortar stores. It's not as simple as people think, but in terms of growth, for the last 15 to 20 years, ever since the discounters took over the suburbs, the only way for retailers to grow was to go into Mexico, if you're Walmart, which ended up in lawsuits, to go into Canada, if you're Target. Target managed to lose $5 billion in Canada. I grew up near Target headquarters, and it's like a 5-iron from Canada. The fact that they could be so successful in America and fail miserably in Canada tells it how hard it is to translate retail concepts across the border. You need to grow domestically. E-commerce gives these retailers a chance to do that, to operate in markets they understand faster, easier, quicker. We talked about the Amazon right now. Amazon's $80 billion. People obviously know the success story, but you have to put it in some context. If you take the e-commerce players in the United States, numbers 2 through 11, add them all up, $64 billion. They're a fraction of the size of Amazon, all added up together. And so Walmart has had a website since 1996, I guess. Target had a website in 99. But it's been the very definition of half-assed. They haven't really dedicated any resources into it until now. Because now all of a sudden Amazon's the 4th largest market cap company in the entire world, and they're actually taking real live share. And so you're gonna see that trend, and they did it without really inventing anything except for this. This was Jeff Bezos' #1 insight. Yeah, I consider the S1 from May of 1997 for Amazon to be something of the Magna Carta for all things e-commerce in the history of the world. Bezos buried in that S1 the phrase, "we are never going to make money," something to that effect, to paraphrase it. We're not going to make money now. We're not going to make money next quarter. We're going to dedicate every free cash penny that we have into satisfying the consumer, because that's really all retail is. It was never about books. What Bezos understood, and what every retailer who's been worth his salt for the last 180 years in this country understands, is retail is distribution. It's finding where customers want to buy something and selling it to them. So there's the idea that brick and mortar's dead, or that people were showrooming. Remember showrooming a few years ago? Where they were actually selling the idea that it was a problem that a customer would walk into an electronics store with a smartphone because they were going to comparison shop. That's just insane. If someone's coming into your store and they're openly demonstrating, "I'm going to buy a TV set today," and you're a retailer and you can't close that deal, that's your own fault. Showrooming doesn't exist. What the transition taking place is that retail is not bricks and mortar, and it's not e-commerce. Amazon's opening stores. What retail is being where the customer wants you to be and scratching that itch. We'll talk about millennials in a second, but the fact that you have distribution points everywhere. Right now you're sitting in a store, in effect, and retailers are complaining about that. It's the greatest development in the history of e-commerce, commerce in general, basically since the suburbs were created, since people could get in a car. It's astonishing. What Bezos says is we're going to dedicate every penny we have into that. And so when you look at retailers, and particularly Amazon, they've been complaining about their profitability. What is forgotten in that is the upside of retail itself. The reason it's not so great to be good at retail is that your upside is about a 5% margin. That's it. It's not Microsoft. You're not going to turn it into Windows where you make 90% on every CD-ROM that you print. You're getting about 5%. And if that's your end game, then you err on the side of growth. Because zero profits with 20% growth is much, much better than terminal revenue, where you're not growing revenues at all, but you're managing to get 5%. That makes for a really nice private company, a terrible public company. And as a result, Bezos, being a man of his word, has earned nothing. This is Amazon since they went public, all the way through, that's their net earnings. I didn't actually add it up through time, but let's just say Amazon's not an earnings story. Works out to roughly zero. And he's been punished in the market by having it be the greatest stock pretty much in the history of the planet since 1997. I'm endlessly amused that my friend Henry actually almost went to jail for being bullish on Amazon. Like, you know, as the exemplar of the .coms, how crazy that he'd be bullish on this. That stock has compounded 38% annualized for 20 straight years. It is phenomenal. Play with your compounding. If you want to teach your kids how to compound money, have them plug that in. Your money doubles every 2 years. It's absolutely astonishing what it does. And the only thing that's grown faster are the revenues, which have grown 50%. And so what happened to the companies that did all the good shareholder-friendly stuff? Walmart. They spent the last 15 years doing nothing but trying to hit their quarterly estimate, returning money to shareholders. They gave $20 billion in buybacks because that's somehow an idea of returning money to shareholders. They pay out their dividends, and you can see their earnings grew nice and consistently. And what they get in return? The stock since 2000 is up 26%, half of basically the S&P 500. An absolute train wreck, an entire disaster, because it's really not about the next quarter, particularly when you have this kind of opportunity in front of you. Because what you have to appreciate about retail, and this is the point I made earlier, it's the distribution. 100 years ago, Sears was the biggest retailer in the world, and they didn't have a single store. Not one. 100 years ago, Sears was Amazon. Nothing but mail order. Absolutely not a single thing. The retailers grew with the mail service. You put train tracks throughout the United States, all of a sudden you could ship things out to the sticks, and it was absolutely a fantastic business. Montgomery Ward, Sears, and Spiegel. None of them had stores, biggest retailers in the world. By 50 years later, you had Spiegel and Montgomery Ward kind of getting into CapEx issues. Sears was the only group that was smart enough to build stores. 1925, they started building stores thanks to this man, the general, Robert E. Wood. You probably haven't heard of him because you got to be kind of a retail dork to have heard of him. But he was responsible for the greatest pivot in corporate American history. He was the guy that insisted that Sears build stores. He was a Montgomery Ward guy, and he tried to talk them into it, and they were like, you're crazy. But what he knew, what he understood first, and what other people would pick up on, is that demographics are destiny when it comes to retail. He said, look, we got vets coming back from World War I. The agrarian land, this property value is plummeting. All the jobs are moving into the city. Let's build stores right on kind of the outskirts of the city. Not downtown, not out in the burbs, but just sort of very in the middle there. A lot of those malls still exist. They were built as a result of Robert E. Wood. Because of him, Sears was the biggest retailer in the country from 1925 until 1989, which is just nuts. I mean, Sears is an easy joke now. It's an easy punchline, but it's one of the greatest success stories that you'll ever see. They had one down year through the Great Depression, 1932. One. Otherwise, their stores were growing. And the stores grew that year as well. It's just that mail order had shrunk. And this guy, that's my dad. My dad. He's a Target guy. The point here, it's easy to cherry pick Sears because they were the great winner of the last decade. But when you get these generational shifts, you get a bunch of players winning. Target wasn't the biggest and the best. Walmart, Target, and Kmart were formed within 6 months of each other in 1963. And my dad went into Target 10 years after that. Walmart had already been growing because it was a corporation just on itself. Sam Walt was putting all his money straight back into the stores. Target was much later in the game. Target was much more along the lines of a lot of the retailers you see now that don't have any e-commerce built out yet. And so they're scrambling. But you can scramble. Because like I said, demographics are destiny, and the boomers were turning 30 in 1975 when my old man took it over Target. So he took that chain from 49 stores when he got there in about 8 years to 212 stores, $3.6 billion in revenues, and the stock for Dayton Hudson, the parent corporation, which later became Target, outperformed the S&P by 15-fold. And this was a cruddy market. It doesn't matter what the economy is. Because the other pushbacks you get are that, I'm worried about a recession, I'm worried about consumer spending. A, the American consumer is the best in the world. Not even close. We consume, we're locusts, we just do it. And B, if you're in front of those trends like you were with the boomers and like we're gonna talk about the millennials, they're gonna go out and consume no matter where they are. 1982 was a horrible time. The Target worked then too, simply because my old man was obsessive about building clean stores that rich people would shop in and get a discount, and they'd go there over and over again. He focused on the one thing, just like Bezos did before him, just like Wood did before him. He knew the people were coming if they put the stores in the right place and respected the customer. And so they invested. Walmart invested. Kmart tried to do it on the cheap. Kmart was obsessed with taking out Sears for the top revenue spot, and so they put up all these cruddy stores. To this day, you can find those Kmarts. They're kind of like behind the used car dealership about 3 blocks off the freeway. Those are the malls that are closing. And so when you read these horrible stories about every mall is closing, I was part of the media. I know why you do those stories. There's a grain of truth, but it's also an awesome story. You put a little guitar behind you, and you stand in an empty parking lot, maybe a tumbleweed blows by, maybe some trash, and folks don't come around the old Hillside Mall anymore. And then you show 5 people going out of business. You gotta remember that those malls, in many cases, were built by freaking General Wood 100 years ago. This is kind of the circle of life. The malls going out of business isn't an indictment of the consumer, it's just progress. It's the way life works. Which brings us to the other pushback you get. The millennials are different. They're these special snowflakes. They don't like to spend. They like to sit in their basement. And you read all these, they're great stories because every generation in American history has loved to just shit on the generation below them. And so, you find things like they spend 73% of their free time playing video games. Half of the jobless millennials have pain pill prescriptions. They behave horribly, and that is lamentable though it is, but it's largely crap. It's largely just public stuff. The acid test for whether or not a millennial trend piece is actually a trend as opposed to just describing someone when they're 20 is to ask that question. Could this article apply to me? When I was 20, I wasted plenty of time. I don't know about you guys. I mean, maybe you were all super industrious, but because you have free time. The truth in American life is, though, you run out of that. In your 20s, everyone's dissatisfied with their job. All the things that are supposedly trends are just a function of being 20. You sit around, you play video games, you drink too much, you don't build a house, you don't save because you're 20 and you're gonna live for 1,000 years. And besides, you're making no money anyway because your job stinks, because you're 20 and you know everything in the world, but you have no professional skills. That's how life works. And then what happens is you have a baby and you settle down. And all of a sudden, you gotta save because you gotta send this little brat to school. All of a sudden, sitting in your basement all day, nesting. How many of you guys have kids? Are young kids? They're young now, or they were at some point. Does the idea of nesting in your house with a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old for an entire Saturday appeal to you? It sounds like hell on earth. It sounds like an absolute prison. It's the idea that you're never going to leave the house. Malls have always served a social entertainment function, and they always will, in some form or another. It's not a matter of whether or not you're going to drive the business, but as it turns out, the Gap is not selling parking spaces. The Gap doesn't care. They sell clothes. They can sell them anywhere. They don't care about mall traffic, and mall death is overrated anyway. And this, to me, is the money grab. People are breeding later, for a lot of reasons. But this is the easiest explanation of any delay you see in the millennials are simply the boomers had kids at an average of 21. Now it's 26. Average age of getting married was 25. 30 years ago, it's 29 now. They live longer. The boomers, we have 14% of our population that's just turning 30 now. They're just having kids. They're just breeding. Sure, in 5 years, some of those guys playing video games in the basement all day will still be doing that, but for the most part, they're either going to be divorced and doing that, or they're going to be finding other stuff to do. And you add that into the boomers, if they are living at home, the boomers are retiring. The only thing worse than hanging out with your kids in a basement all day is hanging out with your mom and dad. They're going to leave the house, I promise. You're already seeing it. Did you guys see the Bass Fish acquisition the other day? It's this guy, Johnny Morris, down in the middle of the South. They have emporiums built to bass fishing. It gets no play in the New York media because they just can't keep the sneer out of their voice when they talk about things like that. But what he's built are entertainment meccas, places that you go and you hang out and you spend a day. And it looks like absolute heaven if you have kids because you can just throw them in there and let them fish and hang out. That experience is not going away, and it won't go away for the millennials. They just got to grow up a little bit. The other thing, student debt. Student debt's a nightmare. No one has a job. This is the most liquid generation we've ever had. We scared these people at exactly the right time in their lives. No one's taking on debt because they're horrified because they saw what a mess that Gen X made of all the entire housing market. They're liquid. They have money. They can control their debt. They're going to be absolutely in their prime as they get good jobs and they're spending. Whoops, what happened there? Jeff Bezos has such a nice face to draw, by the way. There we go. I did draw those. This is the other thing, 25 to 34-year-old employment. The highest year-over-year increase in people that age coming into the employment sector since 1982. Should ring 2 bells. 1, it's when my old man was building targets, and 2, it's when the baby boomers started getting some money. And it was also a horrible time in the economy, but a great time to invest. That's pretty much where we are now in terms of the demographics. And so you have this confluence of 2 variables that are really misunderstood, generally speaking, for pretty good reasons, not because people are dumb, but just because they don't get them. They think the millennials are special snowflakes that aren't going to have kids and behave like every other American generation ever has. And they feel as though it's brick and mortar's dead, so retail's going to go away. Both those are wrong, and you can make money doing it. So how do you invest in it? How do you play it? This is real simple. The retailers over the last 10 or 15 years that have been doing the shareholder-friendly stuff and have run out of liquidity are dead. The guys doing buybacks, the Whole Foods of the world, where they just borrowed and they created leverage where they didn't need it without an answer to solve their fundamental problems are gone. If you had an opportunity the size of what the e-commerce market is presented to a retailer, and you said it was a state, or you said it was Canada, any retailer worth its salt would go into that market with both feet, its legs, everything else. You'd put every penny into it because the opportunity is enormous and the market share is sitting right there for you to take. It's real easy to find the retailers that are going to win. They're the ones who are spending on e-commerce in a real way. Not in that goofy, oh, we're going to have omni-channel, we've opened a website, but in a real way where you incorporate the technology available to turn every Nordstrom into the biggest one you have. You take advantage of your inventory synergies. You have an actual app that works. You can interact with the customer in ways that you never could before. Entertainment retail is going to win big. It's going to win big because people think it's done. And trust me, everyone wants to leave the house. And finally, you got to extend your time frames. They just downgraded, I forget which house it was, they downgraded the department stores today. JCPenney and Kohl's and things like that. Listen, if you're long department stores because you think next quarter is going to be good, that's wrong. What you need is the subjectivity, the judgment to go in there and figure out why they're missing. I love it when companies I'm long miss for good reasons. And it's because I know how Gap works and I kind of have a feel for the reasons. And if I agree with what their strategy is, and if it's working towards where the puck is going, as Gretzky said, if they're in front of the trend, there's no way to spend money poorly. You don't have to catch Amazon. You have to be better than the rugby scrum that's behind Amazon. Right now, Walmart does 2% of its business online. Target's even lower. It's a huge opportunity, and they're bailing on it. So here's some of the plays I like. I like Walmart, I like cost more than Whole Foods. Whole Foods is a classic example of a company that is not spending in the right place because they want to protect the stock. Cinemark over Netflix. Has there been an industry on earth that's been more disrupted than movies over the last 10 years? And yet there's more movie screens today than there were 10 years ago. It's about leaving the house. It's about upgrading the theaters and giving people something to do. Fast fashion in the malls. We don't even have time to get into it now. Inventory turn. As it turns out, folks go to stores more when you have better inventory faster. The retailers, too many of them are doing business the old school way. Gap still has 4 seasons of fashion. They still have a fall lineup. Macy's is still selling winter coats from 2015. Wow! Give them to Goodwill, do anything. But the idea that you would choke on inventory for an entire year in this day and age is crazy. Nordstrom, on the other hand, actually has some capital. They've got a little cash working. They can create a better experience. It's nice to go shopping. It's okay if they're out of stock as long as they're able to use the technology to find you the product, get it to you the next day. In fact, in some ways, it's even better. You can use it to enhance the service rather than being stuck in this mindset that we're not online. It's all going to work. And then you got just the failures, the over-levered guys who they can never fix themselves, the Signet of the world. People who have doubled down on mall space have doubled down on the idea that physical stores are their business and not actually selling goods and services. Those are going to be the losers. And it's going to take about 10 years, but I tell you what, I'm not sure if it sounds sexy or not, but I know the greatest fortunes in this country were built largely through retail. The Walton family still owns 40% of Walmart. Bezos is worth $72 million. Sears has been scattered to the wind 5,000 times, and you still have people that are loaded. You can make a fortune in these trades, but you got to be in front of it on the generational switch, because otherwise you're just grinding your gears. I'm not trying to give you trade tips or ideas, but this is how I'm spending my money and my time over the next decade, because it's just a monster opportunity. Yes, sir. Howard, you're right.
The preceding program was a production of the Options Insider Radio Network. For more quality options programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app, available in iTunes and on Google Play. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.